Hi everyone, I'm Greg. This is Philip Wilfred W. van der Merwe, and we are Tonic. We are furniture designers and interior designers. A brief history on how we got started. I met Philip about 20 years ago. We were studying design. When we finished studying, we traveled abroad. We worked for various architects and designers. We came back to South Africa, worked for more architects and designers. And then decided that we needed to open our own studio. We did that. Our first job that we had was to design a restaurant, bar, kind of cocktail lounge. That soon became a franchise of restaurants, and we designed another restaurant, after another restaurant, and another restaurant. So to get out of this rut, we felt that we needed to do something interesting and put something out that was about us. We decided to design a range of furniture and open a showroom. So we opened this tiny little 30 square meter showroom, which was in front of our even smaller studio at the end of a little strip mall in Johannesburg. This was the first range of furniture that we designed. 10 years on now, we still have a studio and a showroom in Johannesburg, slightly bigger. And we've just opened our first showroom in Woodstock in Cape Town. Back to this first range of furniture. At the time, we were quite disillusioned by the furniture that was available to us to use for projects. Most of the furniture seemed to be just made out of chipboard, simple butt joints, veneered edges kept on peeling off, probably made in beech veneer. A lot of it sort of sprayed over with a simple kind of mahogany stain. And we weren't very inspired by that, so we decided we needed to change that. We needed to create furniture that was more about celebrating handcraft, about traditional joinery techniques in a contemporary way, but really about the art of furniture making. It's our showroom in Johannesburg. This is our soon-to-be opened shop in Woodstock. Sorry. The first range one of our early ranges of furniture were very much inspired by mid-century furniture. We were looking at furniture designers like Hans Wagner, Finn Newell, Marcel Borg Morgensen, and especially looking at their work and their attention to detail, how they sort of paid a lot of attention to detail and craft. We wanted to create something that was sort of fighting against that chipboard, simple construction, and you'll see in these designs, I mean, they are quite inspired by that sort of 50s, 60s design, but they're beautifully handcrafted. A lot of them are made by kind of very small, old retired furniture makers, some of them even out of their garages in the suburbs. But they really celebrated the craft, we felt. We still use a lot of these pieces in our projects today, which is great. We tried to design something that was timeless, and I think we achieved that. In 2003, I think it was, Ravi asked us to design a piece of furniture for a charity auction for the Design Indaba. The brief was to go around your cities and to look at street furniture and get inspired by informal traders and the furniture that they were creating out of necessity, and to come up with a piece of furniture around that. We spent a couple of days in the CBD of Johannesburg and came across a lot of interesting people and kind of very inventive people. This particular shot inspired us in particular. Most of the traders would sort of put together whatever they had to create their tables and display furniture out of sort of broken chairs, broken milk crates, old planks, old boards. So we used this and sort of took the components, took sort of two broken armchairs perpendicular on either end, supporting two planks, and came up with a simple bench design. We stripped this back to its sort of simplest form, and created a bench which we called the Hawker bench. After being labeled retro designers for a while, we really didn't like that term. We didn't feel we were retro designers, although we were inspired by what they were doing. We wanted to design something that didn't really have anything to do with nostalgia, no sort of visual references. So this range that we designed for Design Indaba a couple of years ago was more about form, texture, materials, and just an interesting use of these odd combinations. So we were using high gloss Duco with oxidized brass, solid oak that had sort of hand-rubbed oil finishes on. And it was just about construction and about the materiality of the furniture. It was also about sort of deconstructing the way things were put together. Sort of the handle became the leg, and they ran into each other. It was about customizing a lot of these things and not using sort of off-the-shelf products. Then last year, again, we did a launch of furniture that we presented at the Design Indaba. We started using a material called solid core formica, which is a very thin, very dense material that's kind of traditionally used for laboratory furniture, amongst other things. The beauty of it is that it has that very thin appearance. It has quite an industrial feel, but we wanted to change that perception, and we thought it was quite successful by pairing it with these traditional joinery techniques with soft sort of timber, and just the graphic line of that thin black material also allowed us to experiment with shape and proportion quite successfully, sort of highlighting the timber, sort of exposing interesting details. So inside there would still be this kind of very traditional craft, little drawer boxes with finger joints, sort of a burst of color inside the cabinets. This chair was also part of that range. For this particular chair, we were looking at furniture design from sort of Brazil in the 60s and 70s, in particular architect designer Sergio Rodriguez. These are two of his chairs. The chair on the right sort of flat packs, and it's put together with these very beautiful, simple little timber dowels that are held together with a little leather cord. The chair on the left, which Philip hates, it has this kind of voluptuous upholstery that hangs over the frame. So we wanted to design something that was far more minimal, far more simple, but still drew inspiration from these pieces of furniture. So we started by designing a very sort of cubulous, simple, solid timber frame, routed out these slots in the side that allowed us to then cradle the upholstery. The upholstery was then pulled into the frame with these leather belts and held in with little timber dowel sticks. We designed two side tables, one in solid oak and one in solid brass, oxidized. And these tables are really just about playing with construction and form and it's kind of beautiful negative space below the table. It was a series of multiple legs joined together with these horizontal bands at different heights. We even pulled the legs through the top, so on the top you saw the little solid timber coming through with a split joint on the top, just accentuating the beauty and the detail. That's the timber one, and then there's a brass side table as well. Again, most of these pieces are one-offs. I mean, a lot of our designs are sort of prototyped and brought into the shop straight away. We work with very small manufacturers, and it allows us to kind of experiment the whole time. When we were looking at all the street furniture for Ravi's project, we came across this table, which we thought was quite fun. Clearly, the trader sort of, as his business grew, he extended his table and sort of propped it up with just whatever legs he could find. So different materials, different shapes, different sizes. And this kind of inspired us to design this little server. We played around with the legs being at different angles and thicknesses that didn't really work, so we simplified it and ended up just being random placement of different diameter legs. We did a server in solid timber and then a little brass side table again. Another piece, this was designed for Southern Guild, for the Johannesburg Art Fair. The concept with this unit is that it kind of expands on one the same size module. So it's that one's 2 meters long, but it's made up of 4 sections of 1/2 meter. Each section has a door that revolves around a round bar that matches up to the round bar leg below it, and it's strapped back to a leg behind it. We wanted to pivot the door on the round bar. It became a little bit tricky, so the bar became the handle and the door was just hinged onto the opposite side. But again, we were playing with this materiality, this sort of raw timber that was hand rubbed and oiled, and mild steel components that were waxed. This piece, which was also for Southern Guild for last year for the Johannesburg Art Fair, this one we really wanted to push that even further. We wanted to deconstruct a unit. We wanted to design every piece, every component in the piece of furniture. So we didn't use any off-the-shelf hinges or adjustable feet or handles. We wanted to construct all of that from the beginning. The concept was to have a mild steel framework, and onto that framework, everything either sleeved onto it or attached onto that framework. Just a couple of pictures of the construction of it. That's the mild steel frame. It was a combination of steel and brass, just allowing the two materials to work and rub on each other successfully. That was a mild steel sort of drinks case that's sleeved inside the middle of the cabinet. Laser cut and machined all the components for the hinges. Inserted little roller bearings for the hinges. We turned little brass feet so we could balance the unit, because usually you balance the doors on a hinge. We couldn't adjust the hinges because they were fixed, so that the feet allowed us to adjust the unit to level it. And it was really just about exposing all this detail. And the hinge turned out to be quite an engineering feat, really. That's the unit and its clamps. And then finally, we even left the sides of the unit slightly open, so that door's on a pivot system, so obviously it needs some space to pivot back. That space on the side allows you to view into the construction of those hinges, and yeah, that's the final piece of furniture.
I'm just going to show you, just talk briefly about the kind of project work we do, where the furniture design that we sort of concentrate on is very much about a kind of very clean, minimal aesthetic. A lot of the projects we are slightly more layered, more eclectic in feel. But at the same time, although our interiors are more sort of varied, and the underlying structure to a lot of our work is still based around the similar sort of ideas that we have in terms of furniture design, which is a very clear kind of contemporary aesthetic. I'm just going to talk a little bit more in detail about Slow. It's a project we started about 4 years ago for British Airways Comair. At the time when we initially briefed on it, we were there to essentially replicate the British Airways galleries concept that had been just completed at Heathrow. And it was their kind of real showpiece, and they were very strict about how they wanted this concept to be sort of put in place here in South Africa. It became apparent quite quickly, though, that this was going to be unaffordable. And that gave us the opportunity. The client came in, rebriefed us and said, you guys run with it, let's come up with something new. And I think for us that was a huge turning point, because all of a sudden we were given sort of carte blanche to really go in and explore what this concept could be. Initially, when we sat down at the beginning, we worked with Grid Worldwide, and they came up with the name Slow and the concept sort of behind it. And the whole feeling of the space is very much based around that concept of what the word slow means. It's in an airport, I think the environment generally is rushed, hurried. People are running through the space, and there's nothing really calming or relaxing about an airport environment. And a lot of the surfaces and the materials chosen generally in that kind of a space about plastic, washed down, quick, easy. And we wanted people to come in the space and really sort of slow down, chill out, relax. And so everything that we've done in terms of the design, from the structure of the space, the selection of materials, the way things are detailed, really speak about how we can create a sense of calm and order in a space and just kind of relax you. The space has been organized, Joburg in particular was set out in kind of a series of separate rooms that interlink. And it was kind of around problem solving. The space was very deep, and we were worried about how we were going to get people to the back. And so we thought this series of rooms that kind of pull you through and sort of create visual connections with passages and things. The space is also very much designed around the idea of, people come in and they've got very different requirements in an airport. Some guys have 5 minutes, they want to rush in and get a coffee. Some guys have 2 hours to kill before an international connection or something. And so there needs to be different spaces that allow people to kind of commit to the space in different ways. So you start in areas that are kind of the busier, noisier, bustlier kind of spaces, and then you move through to spaces that generally become calmer and quieter. Throughout the spaces, the idea is to, here particularly in this project, which is slightly different to some of our other work, is that because we didn't want the space to be too varied, too complex. There's a huge repetition of material, there's a repetition of color and palettes, and the idea is to build up kind of a very sort of kind of gentle rhythm and kind of create that pace in the space. We didn't want elements that were sharply out of context that would draw too much attention to themselves. The lounge actually has been very successful for the client, and previously we worked on when the guys basically came in, especially the business traveler would come in and maybe book half an hour. They wanted to, from the time they checked in to the time they boarded, essentially they wanted to be in and out of there as fast as possible. And we've now had basically people check in hours before because they just like to come into the lounge and relax, which is great for us. This is Cape Town. And here, essentially, it's the same ideas that kind of run through. What we've tried to do with the lounges is that essentially there's an underlying scheme that carries through all the lounges, whether it's in Durban or Cape Town or Johannesburg. But then we shift color palettes so that they kind of reflect more the individual cities. So the base materiality, which are all natural, there's a huge play on real timber, real stone. And a lot of these materials are things that you wouldn't really expect in a very high usage area, and the client is kind of committed to actually having to do quite a lot of maintenance on it because materials are quite luxurious for this kind of environment. But it does set the tone that people come in and feel that it's a special place and people enjoy it. Architecturally, Cape Town's quite different, and it's a very different volume, and our challenge here was to really kind of recreate those kind of quieter, intimate spaces in a very large sort of double volume space. While we were busy with this project, the client became very interested in the idea of creating another concept lounge, which we based around really for businessmen who come who are traveling, and I think there's a huge audience now for people of businessmen who do not have formal offices, and people who travel in and out of town and who need a place to work. And the Sloan City concept was born from this. The site was chosen in Sandton to be on the Gautrain. It's kind of a natural extension of you travel to the airport, you take a train, you come in, and you've now got an additional facility that kind of picks up from where the other one left off. But it's very much it's a lounge built around the idea of catering to all the facilities that you might require as a traveler or as a businessman in a city. But here the shift needed to be quite different because the feel of the space is now in an urban context. And we wanted to build up a whole new set of criteria for the lounge. And so we initially came up with a whole lot of imagery that kind of, we didn't want to create individual kind of personalities. We wanted to look at how a city sits together in a more abstract way. And the idea came through of, in cities you don't choose your neighbors, and very often you are pushed up against something that's unfamiliar or uncomfortable. And so it's those kind of tensions that are created between those spaces that become quite interesting. And that's a very sort of different concept to the initial lounge concept, which is all about quiet. This is now we're trying to create a more energetic space, and we've done that through trying to create a lot of variation and a lot of variety. But at the same time, it is part of a brand, and because of that, there's an underlying structure that runs through both the schemes, whether it be the airport lounges or the city lounge. One of the great things with the project is that we were allowed to develop quite a lot of site-specific pieces, and some of them not without their problems. One of the first elements was a concrete molded wall that we wanted to do for the sort of entrance to the reception. And the idea behind it was kind of like, if you look at a chocolate mold, we wanted to create like a large mold of a city. And if I'd known how difficult it would be, I probably wouldn't have done it. It was a hell of a process. But here you can see, if you look at the two slides there, the first slide is very much the slow feel, and then we start immediately shifting with a more vibrant color palette and some quite interesting and unusual shaped furniture. The space is laid out in terms of, you arrive in very much a sort of hotel lobby space where you meet and kind of greet people. And here again in the background you see some steel screens we did some collaborations with the Johannesburg artist Michele Matheson, who created this beautiful series of punched stainless steel or punched mild steel screens, which kind of reflect almost a top-down view of a city at night. And at night they sort of illuminated and give that kind of wonderful evening effect. Here's some more slides of those screens. I think some of the challenges with the space were that probably 3/4 of the space is actually a basement, and we had this wonderful upstairs area that had quite a lot of natural light, but we actually needed to filter people down and make it quite logical. So the staircase, which kind of links the spaces, became quite key in trying to get people down there. And we were working with an existing building and trying to get the staircase in and trying to create it that had absolutely no support. It sits completely within a glass box and is only held by the foot and the top. Proved to be quite challenging. With that in the dining room area, we worked with some steel screens, and we used a custom version of a Gregor Jenkin light there, which is actually a magnetic fitting, which allows the guests to kind of freely move those light fittings around that wall on a magnet that you can switch on and off. So downstairs, as you move through the spaces, each space is quite different, and as one goes downstairs, you move into a dining area and then into a series of meeting rooms and private spaces and offices that you can rent for a day. And this kind of playing into the city theme, this was kind of based on creating sort of indoor parks in a way. Another part of the work, and it's something that runs through a lot of our work, is the use of contemporary art. We commissioned a lot of work for this, and I think we were quite fortunate in having a client who was quite open to the idea of having, at times, some quite challenging art, and they've certainly even had a little bit of pushback on certain pieces. But I think the interesting thing here is that for us, there's a huge question in terms of like, how do you create something to look South African? Within South African design, everybody's kind of constantly asking that question. And with the airport environment, it becomes very difficult because very often it's the kind of curio shop thing that's taken through, and it's not a great way to deal with it. But we felt that contemporary art was something that would allow us to create something uniquely South African, put a stamp on the spaces that would define it as South African, and at the same time also offer viewers and guests who come through it something that actually made them look twice and challenged them rather than just kind of decorative stuff that was slapped on there to form a color scheme or something. And here, this is some of the other rooms, which is kind of based around sort of. So there's a play here of kind of old and new, and there's a much larger variety of materiality and color from the city lounge to the airport lounge. Some views of some of the private spaces. One of the rooms I really like, we used a very traditional Fornasetti paper, which is kind of a engraving of a sort of view of Venice. And I like this because the contemporary art that we've chosen for the room is by an artist, Michael McGarry. And it's a view of, like a futurist view of the city of Lagos in 2020. And it has a similar beautiful thin line quality. And the play of the two is, I think, quite beautiful. That's the end of our presentation.